We're sitting down today with Alex Marlowe. He joins us to share the story of his brother Richie, who tragically lost his life at the age of just 34 in a motor vehicle accident. Richie then went on to save the lives of several others, being an organ donor. Alex, I can't even begin to imagine what you've been through. Can you share with us a little bit about Richie's story?
Of course I can, yeah. So Richie passed away at the age of 34. It was about 10, the time goes so quick. It feels like a lifetime ago, and it feels like yesterday, but the time is certainly enough time's passed now for it to feel like an expansive time. So it was in 2010, so 12 years ago he passed away. And it was just a shock. Richie was really, really clever. Like he was the smartest person I've ever met. So I think part of Richie's problem was he was a bit too smart, so he didn't quite fit in. He found just laboring. He goes, why do we do this? Why do we do things like this just in exchange for money? I don't get it. But he was a hard worker, but he was smart. So he thought outside the box all the time, and just everything he did well. When he put his mind to something, he was elite. He could do the Rubik's Cube behind his back. He taught himself one week. He taught himself one weekend how to do a Rubik's Cube. He just thought, I wanted to do that. And that became his party trick. So he had a bit of social anxiety. A really smart guy. He loved his family. He had a young boy, Angus, who at the time was 10. Angus is 22, grown man now. He was really close to my mum and my sister and I. So the four of us moved out from England in the 90s. Mum was a single mum, thought, fuck it, let's move to Australia, and we did. So we were very close, the four of us. So when we lost Richie, we felt it because we weren't a huge family. But he was my mum's best friend. He was her rock. So them two together were everything for each other. He didn't live with my mum, but he would always be the one that had the time to spend time with her and touch base with her. My mum's in her 70s now, but she was in her 60s then. And his story was just as random as probably most other stories that happen like this, out of the blue. So it was during the World Cup. We're mad keen soccer fans, and Richie was up late watching soccer. We were both doing all-nighters watching. There was 3 group games at the time, so he was up all night watching the soccer, and he drove to work the next day, and it was on the way home. It was on the way to, or either way, he was coming or going, but it was he just fell asleep at the car behind the wheel, and there was an eyewitness behind that saw him kind of veering and slowing up, speeding down. So he just fell asleep, crashed into a tree, and it was that. So I remember getting a phone call. I was at work. I'm a chef, and I had my own business. I was cutting up a big 5 kilo, 10 kilo rump, and I had my knife in the beef rump, and I got a phone call. My mum was at the supermarket when she found out. She got a phone call saying, Richie's had an accident. He's critical. I don't know what that means, Al. What does that mean? So she was just beside herself at the supermarket here in Mount Gambier. And so I remember just leaving my knife in the big meat. And I said to my staff, I said, look, my brother's had an accident. I'm not sure what's happening. I'm not sure when I'll be back. And I just left my knife in the meat. So whenever I cut up rump steak to this day, I always think of that moment. And I cut up a lot of rump steak, so I think about it every time. So I went to is this okay telling the story of just this?
Mate. Yeah.
Oh, good. So I went to meet my mum at the supermarket. There was a few people around her because she was beside herself, and then I got a bit more information from the hospital. He was in Melbourne because he was just over the border. We live in South Australia, but he was just over the border near Edenhope because he was working up around there. And we think he was on the way to visit a friend, but he did his own thing. So we're not sure why he was in Edenhope, why he was over the border. That's why they sent him to Melbourne and not to Adelaide, because he was a Victorian motor vehicle accident. So we were told he was in a critical condition, and we spoke to the hospital, the local hospital who kind of treated him, and they said, look, he's in a pretty bad way. He's a pretty sick young man. And he's been sent to the Royal Melbourne Hospital. So that night, after ringing my sister and I, we all congregated at my mum's house, and we had a flight organised to go to Melbourne that night at 5 o'clock. And one of the joys of living in rural South Australia is the regional express airline. I won't name names, but you can figure out who they are. They said, oh, the flight's been delayed at 5 o'clock. That's the case. It was 6 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock, the flight was delayed. Now it was on life support, so we didn't know we had this time. And then they said, oh, the flight's been delayed again. And at 8 o'clock, they told us the flight's been cancelled till the next morning. So we had to, by 8 o'clock, it was too late to drive. We were exhausted, beside ourselves. But if we'd known that there was no flight, we could have driven over at 2 o'clock and been there by 6. So we had the most awful night's sleep that night. It was a nightmare. It really was. And then the next morning, he hadn't passed away, thankfully. So we hopped on the first flight the next morning, and we went to the hospital and we saw him. And it was pretty confronting when you walk into an ICU and you see someone you care about just hooked up to all the machines. And the nurses were lovely. They prepared us for, look, it's quite confronting. But in terms of injuries, he didn't have a mark on him. He had a broken leg and a broken hip, and he had a bit of a mark on his head, but he just looked like he was sleeping. He didn't look disfigured. We were worried he was going to be all disfigured. So fortunately he wasn't. But they just said he had a brain injury, and he was sedated so that the brain can reduce swelling. He was being cooled and all the things that happens. So this was about, we were there in Melbourne. So he was in intensive care for about 3 weeks, and we were given, when we first got there, we were given the whole gamut of possibilities. He could pass away, or he could make a full recovery, or he could be any stage of healthy if he was to make a recovery. So he could have a serious brain injury. So he could have learning difficulties. He might be able to speak. He might be able to walk. We don't know if he could walk or not. But they said there's, people recover from this and they can return and have a good quality of life. So we had no reason to think it wasn't going to be okay. And especially when there was a young man who was in a vehicle accident a few days earlier, who same brain injury, exactly the same brain injury. And about 3 or 4 days into our time in Melbourne, he woke up, and it was such an amazing thing for us to see this young guy wake up. And we were so happy for the family, because we all became quite close, waiting in the waiting room just outside the door there. And he made I'm not sure if he's made a full recovery, but he woke up and he was responsive. He was talking. He would hug his mum, hug his girlfriend, and he was released down to a ward. And we're thinking, beautiful. This is going to be our time. So I was still having to have a business to run in Mount Gambier. So I was flying back to Mount Gambier to do the pays and touch base, and then flying back. So for about 3 weeks, there was a lot of back and forth. But after about a week or so of a few different procedures to reduce the swelling on his brain, and there wasn't really any noticeable improvement, we started to think, shit, this isn't ideal. And it was about, and then there was a lot of time just cramped. So there's a motel just across the road from the Royal Melbourne Hospital, where my mum and my sister and I were just cramped into this room, and my mum would wake up in the middle of the night having nightmares. And it was literally like living a nightmare. You're like in purgatory. You got to go and you still got to go down to the cafe and have a coffee in the morning. You see all the people wandering around doing their daily activities. Right in the hub of Melbourne, you see people going about, and you think, how the hell is the world still going on? How, like, the world has stopped. How the fuck can everybody be just living their lives normally? But they are. The world spins, and this was our time to go through this. So just outside the Royal Melbourne Hospital intensive care waiting room, there's little Zadie, who has the rainbow shoelaces. I hope I've got that right. But she was the first child in the Royal Melbourne to donate organs. And we remember about a week or so in, my sister and I were reading this, and I was thinking, and that was when I thought to myself, fuck, he might not survive this. But we were lucky enough that we knew. We've spoken about this many times with Richie, and he was a very generous guy. And he's spoken to us all explicitly, saying, look, if I die, I don't need my organs. We're all just energy anyway. So it's just if I die, it's just my vessel. I don't need it anymore. And we knew quite clearly that he wanted to be an organ donor, and he was all over the statistics. And he was always the one that said to us, you can't just put it on your driver's license. You've got to let us know you want to be an organ donor. So he was the driver of the conversation in our family long before have the conversation was a thing, you know. It was just the organ donation rates were pretty low, and he was really big on saying, you know, it's actually, you've got to be quite lucky to be able to donate your organs, because it's quite a unique set of circumstances for you to be alive, brain dead, but alive long enough for your organs to be viable. So he educated us on organ donation. Yet he was the one that had to give his organs. So when the time came, about 2 weeks in, we knew things were pretty rough when he started to get a pneumonia. You could hear him wheezing and rattling and breathing, and had to have a few different surgeries to, you know, take the pressure off his brain. And when his wee bag started turning a really dark, horrible, murky color, we're thinking, fuck, this isn't good. You know, that we knew that it was pretty bad. And then when they did pull us into, there's a little room just in the Royal Intensive Care, like a little room that I could only imagine how many horrible conversations they've had, just like ours, in that room. And it was a really sad room. It was just a plain blank room with just a desk and a chair, and we got a little leaflet saying about organ donation. And they said, have you considered organ donation? And by that time, we were all just like, yep, we have. And it was like almost like the one good thing. We knew that it was, we knew which way this was going. Yep. We knew that our miracle wasn't going to happen. And my mum she couldn't comprehend, but she was also, well, that's what Richie would want, so that's what we're going to do. And then when the time came for them to say, look, we're going to have to turn off his life support, he's going to need to pass away within the hour, otherwise his organs aren't viable. So are you prepared for that? And we said, whatever we have to do, that's fine. And that's what we did. So it was at 9 o'clock in the morning when they switched off his life support, and my mum couldn't be in the room. She couldn't bear to deal with it, which is like, I've had kids. I've got 3 kids now, and I can't imagine what that's like. So mum couldn't be in there, and my sister and I were in there, and the doctors said, look, there's a chance he may not pass away. And we're thinking, fuck, really? Because that's the last thing he'd want, is just to be basically a comatose burden for us for the rest of our lives. But it's almost like when they switched off the life support, it was probably less than a minute.
Right. And
you could almost hear him say the relief, like, thank fuck, guys, what took you so long?
Yeah.
And you could see the moment. You can actually see the moment. Whatever makes you human disappears. You actually see the moment, and that's how I'm not a religious person, but I do know there's something that gives us our life that is unexplainable, and that whatever makes us human leaves us and can exit our body, and I saw the moment, and I was like, then he was just, you know, the skin changes color instantly, and you're like, he's gone. And you could just almost hear his relief, like he was off, he was free. And he was always big on things that are unexplainable. He was always not a believer in religion, but certainly a believer in something greater than us. And he was off to find it, and that was that. And it was awful. And my sister and I and him, we held our hands like this, and she's got a tattoo of us all holding our hands on her back, and then that's it. They explained to us about he's going to go and have surgery now, and that they treat him with really dignity and everything that needed to be done. So they took him away, and then at that moment that we were being told Richie's gone, there's somebody that had a young family that was getting a kidney transplant and a few other things. So that is what it is. And what do you do? And people say that's awful. It is awful, but at the same time, a lot of people crash into trees and they die at the tree, you know. A lot of people can't sit around for 3 weeks with their family and bond. And then all of Richie's closest friends had a chance to drive across from Mount Gambier. Some drove across in the middle of the night when they heard. And then the amount of people that we knew, he knew, but the amount of people we didn't know who just had to stop what they were doing and drive all the way to Melbourne in the middle of the night just to see him. These people we never met, and he just made all these connections. So while I was busy building my business and working, and while my sister, he was just busy making connections with people. And I think for him to have this connection with whoever received his organs and tissues, that's just him doing his thing, just building, just giving. And yeah, it was horrible. It was a really shitty experience. And it's something that as a guy that runs a hospital cafe, which I do, I think it helped me relate to my customers a lot more. So I could actually put myself in their shoes, and the amount of people that come to a hospital and they're coming to get their coffee every day and they're just going through shit. You can say, you know what, it is shit, and there's nothing going to make it less shit. It's okay to say it's shit. You can't sugarcoat shit. That's fine, you know. And yeah, it was the first real bad thing that ever happened to me in my life. I'd had a pretty smooth run, and yeah, to lose Richie was pretty big loss, because he was my best friend. We were very close but very different, and yeah, it was really tough. It was.
And it's nothing short of just a. It's hard for me. This is the first time I've ever heard the other side, you know, the donor family side, for someone who's benefited from Richie's selfless act to be a donor. It's overwhelming, understating it, to be honest. And it is, it's just gut wrenching, mate, to be hearing that side. And you know, you talked a bit about your brothers, you know, being a bit superstitious and you know, weird things happening for a reason. Like we spoke on the phone, and there was a bit of back and forth on trying to work out the best day to do this, and you chose today, which out of 365 days is the day of my anniversary of the transplant.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's extraordinary. Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
So
it's giving me goosebumps, actually. That's unbelievable.
You know, you just, and I've never spoken to someone, you know, as face to face as an organ donor. So, and
look, there are things that we can't explain the way the world works, and I think as humans, our little tiny brains can't conceive just how grand whatever has put all this together, how grand it is. And our little human brains, we try to comprehend, but we can't. And a few people who are a little bit on a different tangent than us normal folk can start to conceive it and start to put pieces together. And Richie was one of those people. And the morning that he drove to work, my mum told me this story, and it was another goosebump moment. The morning that he drove to work, the day he died, we say the day he died, it's the day he hit the tree, that's the day he died for us. He died 3 weeks later, but for us, the day we lost him was that day. And we were lucky enough to get 3 weeks as a family with him, but he passed away the day. So the day he died, he knocked on mum's door in the morning, and he put his head in. He goes, Mum. She's like, what? He goes, just blink. And she goes, what do you mean? He goes, just blink. And she goes, okay. And he goes, that's your life, Mum. Blink. That's your life. See you tonight. I love you. That was the last thing he said.
Wow.
It was just blink. Like it's just, I don't know. Can't explain. There's so many things. And then him and I had a few arguments over a few things. We lived our lives differently. Like I was very much towing the line in terms of building your life and mortgage and marriage and build a business and all these things. And he was very much a free spirit, doing vineyard work and labor work and finding bits and pieces of jobs. And we had a bit of an argument, and the last time before, but then we were on a good place. But he after he passed away, my mum said, oh, there's a letter to you, Al, from Richie in his drawer. And I'm like, what? And I was worried that it was a real, like an angry letter, like, fuck you, Al, fuck you bloody, but it wasn't. It was the most incredible letter, almost from the grave. It was a letter from him saying, I'm proud of you and all these things. And it was just one of those things where you're like, fuck, something is different. There's something operating on a different plane here, you know. It was, And then I remember Mum saying to me, I want a letter, Al. I wish I had a letter. And I had this letter, this beautiful letter from him, just saying how proud he was and how it's just, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Mate,
But
that is something special to have to hold on to. You know, not many people have
no,
that
they don't.
opportunity, do they? To have
No, they
something.
don't. They don't.
And was he
No,
put a date on it or anything? Yeah, any idea of when he
no,
might?
I'm not sure when. I think it was a day after we'd spent time at my mum's house in a little town where she lives. My sister had come up and her kids and I and her husband, we were all playing tennis, and he was just saying, I had the best afternoon with you, Al, and
Yeah.
I'm really proud of you. And just he used to like say a lot about identity, how, you know, you're not just Alex Marlowe. That's just an identity that you've got, but you're so much more than just. It was just him being typical Richie, like very much deep and
Real
it was just massively just different level, and it was just him just being him, and it was perfect and it was lovely. And I was so worried before I read the letter that I don't want this letter to be just like an angry, because he had a lot of anger in him over, he knew what you should be doing. He knew that he's always, you know, he buy a house and do all these things, like the pressures that society puts on you, but he never did those things. So we felt a certain pressure and maybe a level of jealousy, but at the same time I was jealous of him and his free. It's just one of those things. But it was a great letter. It was a really warm, positive letter, and it's something I'm going to treasure for a long time, which is nice.
Mate, well, look, it's like I said, it's a horrifically sad story, and I'll never understand what you've been through, what my donor family's been through. But on behalf of every transplant recipient, I cannot thank you and your family enough for doing what you did, and Richie for everything he's done. So, mate, thank you very much for sharing that story.
You're welcome. No worries.